Hi, everybody. This is Ralph Russo from The Athletic and The Audible. Before we get into the show today, a note, a little bit of a disclaimer, one might say. After Stuart and I recorded our normal episode on Tuesday afternoon, big news broke in college football. Michigan fired coach Sherrone Moore, citing an inappropriate relationship with somebody in the athletic department. So we came back, Stu and I, and talked a little more about the future of Michigan football, the last 5 years of Michigan football, Sherrone Moore as a coach, things along those lines, maybe who might be next. That story continued to develop over the next couple of hours to Sherrone Moore also being detained by law enforcement in Michigan. So we had to take a little bit of a step back. Obviously, this is a developing story and a fairly serious one. What we decided is we'd like to let this story breathe a little bit, get all the information, and then come back maybe as soon as tomorrow with an episode addressing more Michigan and this situation. So for now, you're going to hear this episode, and we're not going to talk about the biggest news of the day because we just felt like the biggest news of the day was still developing and we didn't have enough information. And we also wanted to be sensitive to the idea of us talking about football when there might be some stuff a lot more serious than football going on. So please bear with us. We will absolutely positively get to you with some analysis and talking about this news. But for now, we're going to stick with the show that we have, which is a little mailbag, some ACC Notre Dame stuff, and hopefully that gets us through the day before we can find out a little more about what went on at Michigan. Hello and welcome to The Audible, presented by Trader Joe's. I'm Ralph Russo from The Athletic, joined by my colleague Stuart Mandel. Bruce Feldman is a little busy with other things today. So it's just Stu and I after Bruce and Stu and Pete Sampson held the fort down for the show earlier this week. Pete Sampson, our great Athletic Notre Dame beat writer, was on to lay out what the brewing feud between Notre Dame and everybody, it seems, really. But to a certain degree, it's been more focused now on the ACC, Stu, and a brewing feud there. So we wanted to get back into that topic without necessarily belaboring it, but Notre Dame is making a lot of news this week. Pete Bavacqua, Notre Dame's athletic director, has been went basically on a 3-day media tour rampage. Right. The final part of it was a news conference held at South Bend in which he really started to push back on how the ACC essentially made the playoff argument a Notre Dame-Miami argument. Notre Dame is a partner with the ACC, but not a full member with the ACC, a member in almost everything but football, hockey as well. And he said that the partnership had been damaged, permanently damaged is what he said. So with that in the crosshairs, now that sort of seeps out into the ether, and you have other commissioners. And remember, Pete Bavacqua is not a commissioner, but he is part of the group of commissioners that handle the college football playoff and make decisions on the format of the college football playoff. So now with his comments in the atmosphere, Stu, some other commissioners have decided to push back on Bavacqua's comments.
I will say this, and I'm a little outspoken about it. I don't like how Notre Dame's reacted to it.
So
okay,
Pete Bavacqua said,
I think Pete's his behavior has been egregious. It's been egregious going after Jim Phillips when they saved Notre Dame during COVID. We all knew, and it was very transparent. Hunter was very transparent about it, the chair, that as Notre Dame and Miami got closer together, head-to-head would be a factor, okay? BYU lost. They became closer together, head-to-head made a difference in that decision. So I think he is totally out of bounds in his approach. And if he was in the room, I'd tell him the same thing.
Wow. If people don't recognize that voice, that is Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark. He was speaking at this event, Ralph. They do. And so right after the regular season ends, like the day after, everybody goes to Vegas for the National Football Foundation Awards, where they induct the Hall of Fame members. And SBJ, Sports Business Journal, for years now, has done these panels, the forums, whatever you want to call it.
Forum.
They get all the commissioners, they get the NCAA president. And I've always thought, like, man, that's genius, because they do it right after whatever thing people are angry about, and everybody can expound on that. That was notable to me. I think he represents the viewpoints of a lot of people across that college athletics, though, where they think, like, you expect the AD of the jilted school to go after the committee or the process or ESPN or whatever it may be. But man, to feud with your own conference over some tweets, it's mostly some tweets and the, replaying the game over and over. Pete Sampson, when he's on here, made the point, like, you didn't have to do it just the two of them, right? You could have had Alabama in those tweets, but maybe that would have been more tactful, but the ACC didn't create that narrative. That was every week on that show. What was the first question Reese Davis always asked Hunter? Miami, Notre Dame, are they close enough yet? When's Miami going to pass them? So the ACC got in. The other thing I would say, Ralph, is 2 years ago, Jim Phillips got killed for not going to bat for Florida State enough, right? To not help make sure they didn't get left out. So last year they went hard for SMU, and this year they went hard for Miami. And the idea that that they should have, of course they're looking out for their full member. Right. One thing he has not mentioned in any of these spiels is, if Miami just getting in earns $4 million for the ACC, split among all their schools. If Miami keeps winning, like Notre Dame did last year, if you make the national championship, you end up earning $20 million for your conference. But if you're Notre Dame, you get to keep that for yourself.
Though the new revenue distribution system within the ACC means Miami, if it was to win the national championship, would earn more of that. I just want to clarify that, because remember when they tweaked the bonuses for TV viewership and the success initiative, I think is what Jim Phillips called it. So there is a little different dynamic. Still, your point is 100% valid. 100% valid. Like, you cannot expect the ACC to put Notre Dame on the equal footing when it's not a football member as
it's
Miami.
Not contributing $1 of its own CFP revenue, right? Every other school in America that's in this playoff is earning money for their conference. Notre Dame is earning money for Notre Dame. I also think the other thing Brett Yormark said that was damn, he went there, was what the ACC did for Notre Dame in 2020. You remember everybody canceled their non-conference schedules. They were only going to play each other, which meant Notre Dame would not have had a schedule. The ACC had them compete, gave them a lifeline. You can compete in our conference this year. They're actually, if you remember, they were in the conference standings. They went to the conference championship game. They were full-blown ACC.
Got into the playoff as not by winning the conference, because they lost the conference championship game to Clemson, but they got to the playoff that year on the backs of an ACC schedule. So implicit
in some of his comments as the notion that, because he keeps saying, he's brought up, hey, when our schools play in their stadiums, they sell out and this and that. Implicit in his comments is, we are more important for ACC football than they are for us. We could go do something else. And I think it's been more reciprocal than maybe he's giving it credit for.
Okay, so a couple of things, and I'll get onto the Yormark piece of this too, because again, these guys have to sit in the same room together. Yormark, Jim Phillips, Greg Sankey. I think Bavacqua at one point in the last couple of days had said the one commissioner he had talked to is Greg Sankey about the Notre Dame situation, which, again, this is a little inside baseball. I feel like when I kind of read the room, Bavacqua and Sankey have a good relationship that sort of maybe goes beyond what Bavacqua has with some of the other commissioners. Again, that's some personal stuff. I don't know. Again, I might be making some assumptions there. I would put it this way. When they were looking to play golf with Donald Trump to do a little lobbying for their bill down in Washington. It was Sankey and Pete Bavacqua. Maybe that gives you a little insight into how some people are aligned down there.
Pete Bavacqua, real quick, for people who don't know his background, he remember Jack Swarbrick was the Notre Dame AD for a long time. He retired 2 years ago, and Pete Bavacqua was an executive at NBC. He basically changed sides. He had been the NBC guy that handles the Notre Dame NBC deal, and he switched over to being the athletic director at Notre Dame. I bring that up because Ralph and I have been covering this for so long. We've seen the makeup of that room completely change from Jim Delaney, Mike Slive, John Swafford, Bob Bowlesby, the people who just worked their way up through,
right? At one point, right? In Big 12.
People who worked their way up through college athletics, have spent their whole career in college athletics, had probably known each other for decades. And now you've got TV executives, right? Not just him, but Tony Petitti, Brett Yormark, a professional sports background. The composition of that room has changed. And my observation is it's gotten a lot more cutthroat. It's not, you used to always hear in the BCS days how they're so collegial. Even if they disagree with each other, it's so collegial. There's nothing collegial about going in front of a panel in Vegas and saying, this other guy that's in the room, man, he was way out of line.
Yeah, I don't know if there's going to be a brawl next time they get together. And the next time the full group gets together is the day before the national championship game. So I think that's January 18th down in Miami Gardens. That's the general. They have a regularly scheduled meeting. Always the day before the national championship game. Actually, again, inside baseball, it used to be the day of the national championship game, which really stunk for those of us who had to cover both that meeting and the game itself. So they're going to gather, and because they had a delay, or they asked for an extension from ESPN to give them a format by the December 1st deadline. That deadline is now January 23rd, which is a few days after the national championship game. They created this slightly open door to maybe doing some things with the format, expansion. It still doesn't seem likely, because the group can't seem to agree on what needs to be done going forward. The interesting thing about, and you're right, the fact that they're not getting along or not seeing eye to eye, it doesn't help things. But I would also say this. I don't know how much it hurts things if Pete Bavacqua and Brett Yormark are a little bit side-eye with each other. And my guess is a lot of times these things, they butt heads. It may not be as collegial as it used to be, but I don't think these guys hate each other, right? Again, I think
they don't hate each other, but I mean, let's be honest, Tony Petitti's not the most popular guy in that room. He's spent the past year and a half trying to shoehorn these ideas on them. So I guess I'd ask you this, Ralph, you've done a lot of reporting about this, in the last, since Sunday, right? There's about a half dozen or so things that people in various corners of the industry are like, we got to change this. We got to do something. The most, obvious one is we got to expand the playoff. And if we're going to expand the playoff, is it going to be the Petitti AQ type model or the 5+11, which frankly, all the other ones support. But also, we are finally, we credit Bruce Feldman for going all in on the weekly ranking shows and maybe playing some role in starting this conversation, where now Jim Phillips, commissioner of the ACC, even says that those weekly ranking shows are incredibly disruptive, cause great anxiety throughout, and we have to find a better way forward. I do not remember people of his pay grade coming out and saying stuff like that about the show publicly. But of course, it's in a contract, right? So how easy or not is that to change? The two group of fives, is causing conversation about, do we need to change some of the parameters around that? So of all the things that are being discussed, what is realistically perhaps on the table for next year's playoff? What are the things that are just kind of be a storyline for 48 hours and go away?
Yeah, I still think that the idea of expansion And again, if they were to expand, that's the thing they need to do by January 23rd. That's a big thing that needs to be, they need to notify ESPN and say, we're going to expand. You need to be prepared to accommodate more games. So that needs to be done by the 23rd. The reason why I'm skeptical about that is I still don't sense any movement from the Big Ten to say, yes, let's expand. Let's give more power to the selection committee. That's the thing that is giving people angst right now too, which is the other weird thing. Like that, as much as the Big Ten has been the most vehemently against a selection committee and using it in the process, it's the thing that's causing the most angst right now. But an expansion to 16 that just adds more at-larges is simply putting more on the plate of the selection committee, right? So I am still skeptical, even though everybody usually can agree on expansion, that we're going to get to that expansion. However, they can get past the deadline and still do some things to the format that keep it at 12 teams, keep what we have now at 12 teams, and tweak some things in the format like they did last year with the seeding that don't impact how many games, right? The ESPN doesn't care if they come back and say, hey, we need a cap on the championship, the conference champions. You have to be at least top 16. You have to be at least top 20, right? Because I think that's one of the things that people are looking at with the JMU Tulane situation and going, we're comfortable with one of these teams, but do we really want the 23rd best team in the country displacing the 11th best team in the country?
Well, let's talk about that for a second. If they were to do that and put those parameters on it, and James Madison, so now James Madison isn't getting an AQ berth. What does that mean? That Notre Dame gets in?
Yeah, I mean, that's what
There's
Notre
an
Dame would
extra
get
large team that year?
Yes, exactly. You'd give up that spot to an at-large, and you give up a conference championship spot to an at-large. But now you have to understand something. If I'm the ACC, I know they got a team in, but they didn't get their champion in. But if Virginia had been the champion, maybe ranked 15th. Last year, the ACC champion was ranked 16th and got in when Clemson had that great comeback in the ACC championship game. So if I'm Jim Phillips and we're putting a cap on the champion, even Brett Yormark to a certain degree, I might be a little leery about that I'm selling off. Like, what is the cap? And am I now making it less likely that I'm going to get my team in there? So again, like that seems like an easy fix, but I'm not sure. Forget the group of five. I'm sure they won't like it, but I do wonder if the ACC and the Big 12 also would be like, I don't know if we love that idea too. Can we make it 20? Can we make it 18? So that's complicating. I don't believe from talking to people in my reporting that they have to tell ESPN about to make a change to the weekly rankings. Now, again, that is in the contract, but I am led to believe that if they did want to talk about changing that could be done after the deadline. Because again, the deadline is about, hey, we have to know when these games are going to be played and where, and we have to schedule things. That doesn't affect that. So if they really are serious about getting rid of the weekly rankings, I think that's a discussion that can flow into next year too. Does it cost them a little money? I'll ask you, Stu, at what point, if you're ESPN, do you just say, I know our ratings are good for this relative to whatever else we would put on, but man, we're catching, we are hurting the credibility of our event. Is it really worth that much money, that much ad revenue
I
to
really
do this
hope
every
this
week?
will be, I really hope the backlash it's gotten this year will be a turning point moment. Kirk Herbstreit himself, right?
Yeah, Pete
your most
mentioned that on the show
prominent analyst
yesterday.
on TV.
Yeah.
He goes on, he by the way, he used to be on that Weekly Tuesday show and took himself off of it a couple years ago. Then, he is on the final one on Sunday, and he called those shows a mistake and that they're misleading. So when your own talent is coming out against it, now I don't think ESPN would be okay with just scrapping those things entirely. but could you at least start them later? Not 5 weeks out, or could you convince people, hey, we probably shouldn't do one the Tuesday before the championship games? Like, that's really boxing us in. All these things can be negotiated. And oh, by the way, as far as I know, they have a memorandum of understanding for all the terms of the future playoff. They don't have a fully long form signed contract because they don't know how many teams are going to be in it. Right. Like they can't finalize it till they know. So I feel like there's a window there to figure something out. It seems like such an easy peace offering, right, for ESPN. Like, okay, yeah, like we can live without 5 ranking, because it says in the contract specifically there will be 5 sets of ranking shows before the final one.
Super important note going forward when we talk about major format changes, expansion, things like that. The next contract basically gives all the power to the Big Ten and SEC, right? So we can talk about what Pete Bavacqua wants and what Brett Yormark wants and Jim Phillips and the G5. The fact of the matter is, the SEC and the Big Ten need to be eye to eye on this, and the SEC wants no automatic bids, and the Big Ten wants a lot of automatic bids. And until we get past that, nothing's going to happen, which is why we're still thinking 12 for next year. The last thing I'll say on this, and we can head to a break, Stu, is, at some point, like the subjectivity, and this is why Tony Petitti, for all he gets excoriated for his formats and his AQs, it does take a lot of the subjectivity out of it. It creates a more obvious path to the playoff, and it does become, I think we're getting to the point where all the arguing, who's number one, who should be in, like that's always been a feature, not a bug in college football. It's getting a little tiresome. It's taking away from the games. And I do wonder if like all of that negativity around the process and people don't trust the process, at some point you have to just understand that like you can't keep fighting against it and it's hurting your system. So I don't know if we get there. But I do wonder if like we are getting to the point where all the debating and never talking about the games and always talking about a committee is something that people in college football go, this isn't great for our sport.
Well, let me separate those into 2 different things. The debating and the arguing has been a part of college football since the beginning of time. I don't care what format you come up with, it'll still be there, right? Committee, people are sick of the committee now. They were just as sick, if not more so, of the computers and the Harris poll and all that. Like it doesn't, as long as you have, unless you're going to do a playoff with 136 teams and where there is no selecting going on, as long as there's going to be a cap on the field and some teams are going to get in and some teams are not, you're going to have arguing and debating. Now, is the current way of doing it necessarily the right way to do that? I think that's certainly can be up for a conversation. But, you brought this up on Sunday. Like you just said, basically 2 people will decide if we want to do some of these changes, right? Greg Sankey, Tony Petitti. Greg Sankey got exactly what he wanted. All they wanted was strength of record to matter, to give their teams credit for the schedules they play. And guess what? It worked. Alabama got in, right? So it may be that, like Tony Petitti might look at this as like, see, I told you guys, the committee, we can't be relying on a committee. You should do my system. If I'm Greg Sankey, I say, seemed fine by me. Like, what's the problem, guys? Alabama got in.
Yeah, that's exactly it. All right, let's go to a break. We're going to come back and talk a little Heisman before we hit, of course, it's Mailbag Day. So we have to hit the mailbag. We'll be back right after this. And we're back. So we also got some Heisman finalists in the last couple of days, but we've been talking so much about Notre Dame and the playoff aftermath that I don't even think you guys got to them on the show the other day. So the Heisman finalists are from Vanderbilt, Diego Pavia. What a world. Vanderbilt quarterback as a Heisman finalist. Indiana quarterback Fernando Mendoza. Again, what a world. Vanderbilt quarterback and the Indiana quarterback. Notre Dame running back Jeremiah Love and Ohio State quarterback Julian Sayin. Most notable from that is I got one of the finalists right in our Heisman draft.
Oh yeah, you probably won that thing, right?
No, I got Julian saying, and that was it. I didn't have Jeremiah Love. I had Jeremiah Smith.
Love.
Oh, you did? Okay. But
it's based on the top 10. And from what I remember, you had some other guys that'll probably be in the top 10.
No, I could have. I could have and should have. Maybe Jeremiah Smith. Jeremiah Smith could end up being in the top 10. So the guy, and Marcel Reed, I guess, could be in the top 10 too. The guy I almost had, though, I even wrote it in my comment. Matt Brown, our editor, pointed it out to me. In my comment for Marcel Reed, who was my last draft pick in the 4th round, it was, I touted him in the offseason, so I felt obligated to take him now. The one guy I thought about in this spot, and I was surprised he didn't get selected at all, Fernando Mendoza. He was basically my number 2 of the selection there. So I would have been the king of this thing if I don't know if anybody took Pavia also in our draft. Anyway, those are the Heisman finalists, Stu.
Wait, now you got me looking this back up. Nobody took Pavia?
I don't know. I don't think anybody. Listen, Vanderbilt was predicted to finish in the bottom half of the SEC this year. We all totally whiffed on Vanderbilt, despite what Barton Simmons was telling us all. The former 247 guy.
So I had Jeremiah Love, Bryce Underwood, Nick Singleton, and Darian Mensah, who ended up having a pretty good year, but he's not going to be in the Heisman top 10. You had Jeremiah Smith, Avery Johnson. Oh boy.
Yes,
Julian Sayin and Marcel Reed. You're going to win this because you'll get.
I'm going to get 3 guys in the top 10.
Yeah, you're going to win. No doubt about it. I'm just seeing if anybody else. Bruce had Garrett Nussmeier, Carson Beck, Ty Simpson, and Dylan Raiola. That was a rough one. David
Simpson.
Ubben. Dave, I don't know if do we total up who came in last? David Ubben had Lenora Sellers, DJ Lagway, Devin Dampier, and Austin Simmons. Remember when Austin Simmons was going to be the Ole Miss star quarterback? What I'm excited about.
What's notable? Yeah, I'll be there Saturday night because it's in New York, so I'll be around.
Though I used to cover the Heisman. It's kind of humiliating that you're covering it, but you're not actually allowed to be in the room where it happens.
The worst access of any event that we do, but because I live in New York, it's easy for me to get to. I'll cover it.
Well, what I'm really intrigued by is this. How often do you actually have suspense at the ceremony? Usually, by the time you get there, you have a pretty good sense that who's going to win, right? And I think Fernando Mendoza is going to win, but according to our last Heisman straw poll we do, 26 writers and editors vote their hypothetical ballot, or I guess in this case, maybe their real ballot. And it was Mendoza, 64 points, Pavia, 61 points, Jeremiah Love, 25, David Bailey, 2, Jacob Rodriguez, 2, Julian Sayin, 1, Jeremiah Smith, 1. So basically, almost everybody voted either Mendoza or Pavia number 1, and it was very close. Mendoza got 14 first place votes, Pavia got 11. So if that is what the electorate at large looks like, you could have one of the closer finishes you've ever had.
Closest one ever was Mark Ingram, if I remember correctly. I think that's still the closest. Last year's was actually fairly close too. It wasn't that close. It wasn't like a photo finish between Hunter and Genty. But because Travis Hunter and Ashton Genty sort of consumed all the first and second place votes and everything else went a different direction, it was a relatively close vote between those two guys. I believe Mark Ingram over Toby Gerhart might have been the closest, or either was one of the closest or the second closest. The Bo Jackson Chuck Long one was also, and back in the 80s, was also very, very close. So here's the thing that's notable about that. I think the betting markets right now are saying Mendoza. I don't know why. Because, here's why. Because they look at our straw polls, right? They look at the straw poll of The Athletic and but the Heisman rules are such that we're not supposed to give out votes. By the way, I hadn't voted in 20 years, Stu. This is my first time voting, voting in 20 years. So we're not supposed to reveal our votes. The Heisman asks us to do that, so it builds up a little more drama during the leading into the show. The main takeaway for me is if I have to write a little news story about who wins, that means I'm going to have to write 2. I'm going to have to prep 2 stories, one with Mendoza winning.
Tell us, when's the last time you had to do that?
So generally, because I remember I used to do this for the AP every year, more often than not, I would do one full story for who I thought would be the winner, like Hunter last year, and maybe do a couple of graphs for Ashton Genty. But it had been a while. In fact, we had gotten to a pretty long run where I didn't even, I tempted fate and just was like, Joe Burrow is going to win. I'm not going to write whoever's second to Joe Burrow. For the most part, occasionally, again, at a certain point, I became a little more savvy about it. Plus, you got to remember, they used to have a lot of these other public straw polls that used to almost always guess the winner right. But this will be the first year in a while that I will literally have to say, okay, I guess I'm going to write 300-400 words on Pavia, 300-400 words on Mendoza going into this thing, because we're really not sure who's going to win, Stu.
I'm looking back at the list of Heisman winners. It's been a while. I'm just looking at a long list of guys, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, Bryce Young, that you knew were going to win. You mentioned the 2009 one. It's hard to put myself back in that headspace. It was close, but I'm pretty sure we thought Ingram was going to win.
We did, but it was super close. And I think what also happened that year is in Dominican, Sue came on late.
Yeah.
It just split a lot of the votes in many different directions, and it created a close vote.
There's certainly never been anything close to the Charles Woodson Peyton Manning thing since. Most people tuning into that show that night were expecting Peyton Manning to win. That was a legitimate, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. There hasn't been anything like that since. I don't know that either guy here would be considered oh my gosh, I can't believe it happened. But I am expecting Mendoza to win just because he beat Ohio State.
Yeah.
With 18 million people watching.
Yeah.
He has Indiana as the number 1 seed. He had several what you would call Heisman moments. And he goes and beats Oregon. They beat 2 top 5 teams. Yeah. Obviously, the drive at Penn State.
Super clutch.
Pavia has a perfectly good argument. In fact, one would just be as amazing as the Indiana story has been, as preposterous it would have been to think that Indiana would ever have a 13-0 team that's number 1 in the country. Who would have ever thought Vanderbilt would be a 10-win team?
Yeah. Equally preposterous and amazing. And, I think the one, Pavia's got better numbers. Mendoza supporters will point out, hey, our guy sat out a fair amount of fourth quarters and was super clutch in our biggest games, whereas Pavia really did carry the entire offense. I mean, he's such a driving force and a charismatic leader as well for Vanderbilt. Better overall numbers, driving force, but also probably played 2 of his worst games in the biggest games, right? They didn't beat Alabama, and he had a couple of key turnovers there, and they fell behind big against Texas. So that's the argument there. I think you're right. I think Mendoza will win. We'll talk about who we voted for. We'll bring it up after on next Monday's show. Let's take a break. Let's hit the mailbag when we get back. We're back, and now it's time to get to your mailbag questions. Remember to send your questions in to theaudiblepod@gmail.com, theaudiblepod@gmail.com. Hopefully you can get yourself on to the mailbag and in line to possibly grab a $12 Trader Joe's gift card. First one, SEC versus Big Ten, directed directly at you, Stu. Love the pod. With 3 of the top 5 teams coming from the Big Ten, I don't know how you can still say the SEC is the strongest conference. If the situation were completely reversed and 3 of the top 5 SEC teams, if 3 of the top 5 teams were SEC teams, I'm pretty sure you'd be using that as Exhibit A for why the SEC is clearly the best league. That comes from listener Boatwagon. I will say this, I really, really love when people tell me how I'm going to think. That's always a great way to get me engaged in a conversation by telling me in advance how I would think about something. Anyway, how do you think about this, Stu?
The SEC, the top of the Big Ten caught up to the top of the SEC several years ago, and you're seeing that in full display. I mean, 3 of the top 5 are Big Ten. When I was kind of looking, we were doing our playoff picks. It's I have a lot of confidence in Georgia. And then every one of the other SEC teams in the field, I would argue, are not as confident as even Oregon, right? But first of all, every metric says the SEC is a tougher conference, so it's not like I'm making this up out of thin air. It's when you get to the back half, right? What makes the SEC, and I don't even necessarily know the word is better, but just like tougher, deeper.
Yeah, deeper. And you could say tougher because, again, like the degree of difficulty for every SEC game is probably going to be a little more difficult than the degree of difficulty for every Big Ten game, right?
So the worst team in the SEC this year, right, was Arkansas.
Yeah.
I think we can agree on that. Arkansas got killed by Notre Dame, so you have some perspective there. I'm going to go from the bottom of the Big Ten up, and I will tell you all the teams that I think are worse than Arkansas. Ready? Purdue, Maryland, Michigan State, Wisconsin, Rutgers, UCLA. How many was that?
Oh, you were asking me to
6.
count. Okay.
And then I would say, Nebraska and Northwestern are probably, and they're like in the middle of the pack.
Yeah, no, I would say those teams are better than
those teams are better than Arkansas, better than Mississippi State. Maybe not much more than that.
I mean, I can make an argument that Arkansas is the best 2-10 team ever. Now, that's not, you're not hanging a banger. Yeah, not really hanging a banner for that. But if you look at how competitive they were within the SEC, they were definitely much better. Just a quick way to sort of quantify this, and I know some people hate metrics. Thank God Bruce isn't here. If we look at our friend Bill Conley's SP Plus ratings, I believe the lowest rated SEC team is number 63 out of all of 130, whatever.
Oh, yeah. Kentucky is the worst team.
Yeah. By those metrics, right? By those metrics, Kentucky is the worst team. But there are still behind Kentucky, you would still find Minnesota, Rutgers, Maryland,
Northwestern is actually one spot behind Kentucky.
Yeah, Michigan State, Wisconsin, Purdue. This is the argument that Greg Sankey makes when he talks about strength of schedule, is that we just have fewer layups on our schedule. And I do think that that's a fair argument. What I always, though, will caveat it with, and I give a nod to our listener who pointed it out, because I am not here to argue. I don't like the argument that because Arkansas is better than Rutgers, that has to mean something when I'm evaluating Oregon.
Right. It's about who those teams are playing over the course of the season. And let's be honest, Ohio State's schedule, up until the last 2 weeks of the season was not what some of these SEC teams were playing. That being said, I think Ohio State is as good or better than anybody in the SEC.
Gotcha. Next up.
So, and then the other thing I would just say is while the SEC kind of remains in that driver's seat, it is not the conference it was 5-10 years ago. I mean, they are feeling the effects of NIL and the portal in terms of you guys are still really good, but the days when Alabama and LSU and Georgia, all these teams were just loaded. I would not say that's the case now.
There was a point when Ohio State had a very long losing streak against SEC teams in the 2000s, and they finally broke that streak against Arkansas in a famous bowl where Terrell, I don't want to rehash it all, but Tattoo Gate and Terrell Pry was allowed to play. But yeah, there was a long period of time there when Ohio State was clearly the best team in the Big Ten, but was routinely getting its butt handed to them by the SEC.
Well, look, I'm not a big fan of using those non-CFP bowls as any sort of measuring stick. But hey, December 31st, you've got Iowa against Vanderbilt, and you've got Michigan against Texas, right? The two SEC teams that just missed. Hey, beat them, right?
Yeah.
Beat them, make your case.
That's what happened last year.
That is what happened last year, which of course, and this is why I say don't read too much into those results, which of course caused Illinois to be incredibly overhyped to begin this season. All right, Tyler from Philadelphia has a question about the G5 playoff disdain. I'm glad he's asking this. Wanted to get your take on G5 teams making the playoff and the general disdain a lot of the college football world seems to have toward those teams. A lot of the most memorable games I can think of off the top of my head feature schools like Appalachian State over Michigan, Boise State over Oklahoma, TCU over Wisconsin, etc. We've seen more than enough non-competitive playoff games, even when we only had 4 teams. And you're not going to get me to weep that the 11th best team in the country got left out. So what's the big deal? Why not let these teams have their moment in the sun?
So, Tyler, I generally agree with you. I do think we are facing a little bit of a reckoning, though. If you look back at some of the examples you used about Boise State and TCU is especially an interesting one. I don't know if that quality of team, especially Boise State was at its best, was absolutely a top 5 team that could play with anybody in the country. And we knew that because we literally saw them do it year after year. Remember, there was a point, Stu, Boise State beat Georgia in the Georgia Dome at the time, Georgia Dome.
Handily. Beat Virginia Tech weekend. When Virginia Tech was at its peak.
Yes.
I mean, it was beat Oregon, the famous LeGarrette Blount game, and Oregon went on to the Rose Bowl that year. Like, this wasn't, oh, congratulations, Tulane, you beat Duke, right? Like, they were beating some of the best programs in the country.
The problem is over the last few years, as realignment has taken away some of the best G5 programs, like the gap is clearly growing between certainly the top of the Power 5, because you can point out to me, well, Tulane beat Duke and Tulane beat Northwestern, but what did Tulane do against Ole Miss? I understand that like the best G5 teams can compete against the middle of the best G5 teams can compete against the middle of to the lower parts of the Power 4. But it's getting harder to see the gap, the competitiveness. And at a certain point, like, are you just like handing over? Are we giving Cinderella a chance on the big stage, or are we advantaging the teams that have to play these teams in the playoff to the point where it's imbalancing the playoff? If I'm giving Oregon to JMU, giving JMU to Oregon, is that an unfair advantage for Oregon against the rest? So I do see your point, and I don't necessarily want to throw the G5 aside, but I think there's also like a legitimate, like, recognizing the reality that the gap is growing between these teams, and we're not getting UCF or Auburn in these games like we used to. We saw Liberty a couple of years now. Last year, Boise State competed pretty well against Penn State, and I think Tulane and JMU are going to be a good test case this year. But I'm worried if those games keep being imbalanced and blowouts, it's going to create an argument that why are we playing them? It's fine if they have a shot, but are we just wishful thinking that these teams actually have a shot to beat the big boys?
I think everybody needs to take a breath. I think this is a big reaction to there being 2 this year, right? Yeah. And not 2 particularly good ones. But it took a bizarre, fluky, once in a generation 8-5 situation in the ACC for that to happen. And also, like you said, like, first of all, we are 4 years. That's not 4 years, not a long time, from Cincinnati making the 4-team playoff. They didn't beat Alabama, but that was a juggernaut Alabama team they played. And by the way, that Cincinnati team, I think, put like 9 or 10 guys in the draft the next year.
Yeah.
Now, is that realistic? You can have those kind of teams. Now, I mean, Cincinnati moved up. Houston moved up. UCF moved up. But that Boise State team last year was pretty darn good. I mean, they got into the top 10 mainly because they almost beat the number 1 team in the country, Oregon. I was at the Boise State, Penn State game. It wasn't necessarily a down to the wire game, but Boise didn't embarrass itself. So every year is different is what I'm trying to say. Like, this year did not produce a good group of 5 team. I think we can agree on that. Next year at this time, you might have a team that was more like Boise last year. So, and by the way, there will continue to be at least one, because they don't like antitrust suits and going to Congress and having to explain why they've cut off their system to half the country. So
Okay, question number 3, Stu, and it references Joel Klatt from Fox, who has his own show. Joel Klatt says we need less transparency in the committee rankings. Actually, I think he might be onto something here. Good morning, Bruce, Stu, and Ralph. I was listening to Joel Klatt's show this morning, and in discussing the committee rankings, he compared it to making of a hot dog. Nobody needs to see how it's made to enjoy it. In this discussion, he literally argues for less transparency. While I agree the week-to-week rankings seem to be pointless, often backing the committee into a corner, it seems wild to use that as a justification for less transparency. He also brings a point about the AP is a very transparent. The voter ballots are out there. Wouldn't that be better than just letting the committee be the man behind the curtain? Or do you think Joel is right? To that less is more in this case, and that comes from Ben P.
There's ways for the committee to be transparent that don't involve a weekly ranking show. I mean, the basketball committee, I will say it to the end of time, I do not understand why they feel they have to keep their metrics secret. The basketball committee could not be more transparent. Everybody, they publish the net rankings. They publish the quad 1, quad 2 records. So everybody knows exactly what the criteria is and what they're looking at, but they don't come out on, the week before Selection Sunday and say, here's the 68 team field, right? So, I mean, I agree with Joel if he's referring specifically to the weekly shows. But I would say no transparency would not be a good thing. And I would love to see more transparency. But Ralph, we ask them about this all the time. We don't, they're never going to do it.
Okay, so
show us your strength of schedule rankings.
Just to clarify, though, they don't vote in the room like AP voters do, where I submit a top 25 ballot all by myself in my living room, and the ballots are tabulated and the votes are counted. The committee process is not that. It's more of a building consensus in the room. And yes, they take votes, but it's not the same thing. So in other words, you can't have at the end of the committee meeting, here's how Mike Riley voted, and here's how Jeff Long voted, and here's how Troy Dannon voted, right? Because that's not literally not what they're doing. So in terms of that level of transparency, it's a different process. So you can't provide that same level of transparency. The other part of it too, I do agree with him a little bit here. Maybe there's a modicum of agreement here. People are just so jaded and distrusting. I am getting to the point where I think sometimes I think they should be more transparent with the metrics and things like that and the numbers they use. I also believe that you're getting to the point where no level of transparency will satisfy people to thinking it isn't corrupt. So
that's true. I literally got a mailbag question for the written mailbag from somebody who wants the Athletic to audit the tax returns. And this was a serious question. Has the athletic staff considered auditing the tax returns of the committee members and their family members to see if they're getting bribes, basically? So
right, because certainly Mike Riley and Wesley Walls, that's the other thing too. We talk about the committee is this and the committee is that and the committee is doing ESPN's bidding. I'm you realize who's on this committee? I understand.
No, I don't think people do.
There's some sitting
It's available
ADs
on the website.
Yeah, I understand there's some sitting ADs, but there's also a lot of people who are just the president of Chris Howard was the president of, I can't remember of which school when he was on the committee. So yeah, I mean, just the people who are on here have no allegiance to ESPN. They're not getting paid by it. They're not getting anything from ESPN or anybody else. So it's weird to think that way. Anyway,
well, they do. I think a lot of people do think that. Okay, sure, Ivan Maisel and these people go, but at the end of the day, they do whatever Greg Sankey tells them to do, or what Jimmy Pitaro tells, or whoever it may be.
Yeah, which is not the case.
No, I mean, they don't. What does Ivan Maisel gain from if ESPN gets a 12.2 rating versus an 11.3 rating because Notre Dame's in the field and somebody else is not, or Alabama's in the field and somebody else is not? So
let me say this,
but I get it, Coach.
Yeah.
Conspiracy theories are fun.
You may not like the process, and the process may be broken, and I may not love the process, but everybody in there is really is just doing their best. Sometimes their best isn't in agreement with what you think it should be. All right. One last bonus question before we get out of here, Stu.
Sure.
All right. And this goes to you. Josh from Dallas asks, why is the gift card exactly $12, Stu, from Trader Joe's?
You'd have to ask Trader Joe's. They set that number, not me. Our guy, John, our contact at Trader Joe's, that was his idea. Kind of like it. It's kind of unique. Like, hopefully that's helped people remember that this is our promotion every week. And that, incentivizes people to ask smarter questions, because what's the only thing better than a $10 Trader Joe's gift card, Ralph? A $12 Trader Joe's gift card.
Okay, which is your favorite question that's getting the gift card this week? We may have to bring Matt in to break the tie, producer Matt, but like, what do you want, Stu? What do you think?
They're all good questions. I might go with Tyler with the G5 playoff disdain. What about you?
I will. Yeah, just for the sake of being like not having to put it on Matt, because I'm pretty close here. I'll go with Tyler too from Philadelphia. Tyler, email us at email us at theaudiblepod@gmail.com. Theaudiblepod@gmail.com. Give us your address so we can send you that Trader Joe's gift card.
Quick programming note. We've become so used to those Sunday morning reaction shows, but there will not be one this weekend. Nothing to react to. Real quick, who is your pick in Army Navy?
Oh, I'll go with my father was in the Navy, so I always pick Navy.
Oh, doesn't matter what the team's records are or anything like that.
I always pick Navy.
Navy's the better team this year. I love that offense. Army is definitely, both sides tend to pull some upsets sometimes when you don't expect it, but I will take the midshipmen. And we will be back Monday. We'll see you then.